Hello and welcome to Aviadev Insight Africa, the podcast offering a window to the world of African aviation with your host, John Howell, CEO and founder of Aviadev Africa. Today, we are welcoming back both an informed and respected voice of the African aviation industry to talk about the trends impacting the aircraft finance and leasing market and understand a little bit more about how African airlines can continue to offer connectivity but also grow their network, their fleets, and improve their balance sheets as the supply of aircraft continues to be constrained worldwide. And of course, that's having a big impact on the African carriers. So to do that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome back my guest today, who is the president of Jetcraft Commercial, Raphael Haddad. So welcome back to the podcast, Raphael.
I'm pleased to be here. Thank you very much, John.
Yeah, it's great to have you because obviously we were together about 15 months ago on our last podcast that we did together was episode 271. We were in beautiful Kampala, Uganda, but it's been over a year and loads has changed in that time. You're obviously have your finger on the pulse every day. You're speaking to carriers, you're speaking with the OEMs, you know what's going on in the market. And a couple of weeks ago, you were in Dublin for the Airline Economics Conference. So I think it'd be a great place to start there because I hear great things about the event. And obviously it's where the great and the good of the industry are and where the trends are discussed and debated. So can you give us a little bit of your feedback in terms of the trends, the sentiment after that event?
Okay, the conference was extremely well attended. And the way they spread the event this time was better than last time. So in terms of logistics and arrangements, I was very, very pleased. And it seems to me like the crowds were better organized and on where to meet and what to discuss and the different facilities. So in terms of attendance, to me, it was another record attendance. We had excellent meetings. We were able to talk to OEMs. We were able to talk to many airlines, including some solid and good prospects from Africa and currently operating airlines. And we were able to talk to aftermarket companies as well as the lessors and banks. And so it filled the whole spectrum of people in the aviation industry that are connected to my day-to-day business. In terms of sentiment around the conference, the sentiment was positive, but I sensed also a bit of frustration. The frustration came from the persistence of the supply chain issues that started post the COVID issues. But also, as I said, it's positive because everybody's talking about the airline industry hitting another record in terms of passenger movement. And basically, I think the revenues for the airlines, as announced by IATA, exceeded $1 trillion. That's amazing. That's amazing. So I would say our industry is back to the healthy state where it was pre-COVID. It looks very good. It's positive. Yes, there are hurdles and challenges, among them, of course, all the supply chain issues and the different repercussions from that. But in general, the sentiment was good.
And I think the big question here and the point of what we're trying to get to, I suppose, is because of the supply chain issues, because of the issues that we're all very aware of and the scarcity of aircraft, is aircraft financing becoming more and more difficult, especially for the African airlines? Because, of course, we talked about this previously. And I suppose the question is, number one, is it? And number two, how do the African airlines mitigate the impact of this? What can they do to get higher up the queue, to become more attractive to obviously lessors and get the aircraft they need to provide the connectivity they need to provide?
Well, there are three hindrances in terms of financing for some airlines in Africa. Okay, some airlines in Africa don't have the issues of getting financed. Okay, I don't want to name names, but we all know who are these big champions. However, there are three elements that need to be addressed. Is the perception. Okay, there is a high risk perception for financial institutions in their dealings with airlines in Africa. That perception has to change. We all have to work towards improving that perception or eliminating it. So that's one. Second issue for airline in Africa is the affordability of the finance. Okay, when the risk is high, whether it's perception or real, that drives the higher the affordability of the financing, and of course that is also related to the environment in which the airlines are operating. The third, I would say, challenge is the government policies and artificial complexities that are introduced by the different regulatory environments around Africa and the lack of open skies in Africa. Okay, we keep talking about Saturn, so, but we need to apply it. We need to improve it. So those are the three challenges. And can they be addressed? Yes, because they're all artificially caused. So I would say the high risk perception that can be managed. It can be managed by proper efforts from associations like AFRA or the other associations. Even the African Development Bank has a role to play. Okay, so there are different level of how should I say, para-governmental or institutional that can help and contribute to reducing that perception of high risk because it's not really there. I can name you a long list of good airlines in Africa that are not high risk, but the perception is that they are high risk. On the issue of the financing affordability, here there is a role for the airline to play. What financial institutions want, whether they are African financial institutions or European or North American or Asian financial institutions, the airline has to present a proper business case to those financial institutions to get favorable financing. Okay, so you do that through a proper business plan, to do a proper network planning, a proper fleet planning, and not say, okay, I'm going to start an airline tomorrow. I'm going to start with a wide body. You can't do that. So financial institutions need to see a rational story of why you need this aircraft and why you need this money and why do you need this big, huge office, to move into, so there has to be a proper, well thought business plan and also execution plan. Okay. And then there's the government and the liberalization of airlines around the regulatory wise. That can only be done by positive and the proper approaches from the government. Some governments have done what is needed. Some governments have distanced themselves from their airlines and they've let their airlines grow and prosper. I don't want to name airlines, but those airlines, we all know who they are. Okay. So by creating a proper space for the airlines to operate and the geographical and geoeconomic environment to do that, it is feasible to reduce regulations, regulatory limitations, and let the airline prosper.
Yeah, I think, what I take away from that is number one, perception is something that takes a long time to change because it is kind of a prejudice, right? It's an opinion of something that is informed and it is going to be changed by performance and by action, right? And that is how you change it over time is that people say, I've seen this success story and actually the winds of change are blowing. The second one is, of course, the governments, as you said, create an enabling environment, move out of the way and create an environment where airlines and aviation can prosper. And those countries with governments that have done that have obviously been more successful. But the one in the middle, which is more something that I think you guys are involved in, of course, is the finance side and the access to that. And I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper here because, of course, you've got a partnership with good friends of ours at ABSA, at the ABSA Bank as well. So can you tell us a little bit about this? Because you've been such a champion of sort of African carriers, but what exactly is that?
Well, I'm going to answer you by saying there is money in Africa. There is money in Africa to finance African airlines, to finance sustainable and properly managed African airlines. And interesting is that, for example, ABSA has a focus on working with airlines in Africa. Okay. Now we are an international company. We deal with ABSA Bank and they were gracious to negotiate with us the setup of a trading facility so that we can buy aircraft, through, a lending mechanism with ABSA. But also ABSA comes always to us and say, and other banks, I should say, I don't want to name names, but that's one where we have an existing contracted relationship that, yes, we want to do lending in Africa. Okay. So I'm not talking about one or two. I'm talking probably 4 or 5 different organizations that are willing to do that. And those are very well-funded institutions. So the funds are there to do that. And I can name 3 different airlines that we that we dealt with in Africa this year that have been funded by African money. Okay. Now, these airlines, or some of these airlines, they complain saying, oh, but they want us to fill this document of information and they want to submit this much forms of information, of documents. And I would say, yes, do it, fit it. What is going to take you? A week, 2, 3, put a business plan together? It doesn't hurt you guys. It's always going to go into the right direction. And you do it once, that's it. It's going to be that one, it's going to be it for many, many years. So yes, we should not be lazy about it. We are, as airlines, as people in aviation, we are in control of our own destiny on the affordability of the finance.
Yeah, and that's just the basics, right? If you want to get a mortgage, you want to get a loan, you've got to fill in the forms. You've got to go through the process. I did a podcast last week with an insurance broker. It's exactly the same. If you don't provide the information, the broker can't get you the best price. And it's the same with the finance side. The company providing that finance facility wants to know everything and wants to know that you are planned and that you do have, you can answer the questions when it comes to fund because they want their money back, right? And internally, sometimes they're under pressure because perception, as we've already talked about, that there's a lot of good people in the finance industry in Africa that are doing great things. And it's great to see that being backed up and transactions happen. So I think what I want to move to now is just to talk about fleet development and fleet renewals, because we're all about route development at Aviadev, but of course, before that comes, you need to have the fleet, you need to have the right fleet. So I'm really keen to understand what's driving this. So are airlines that you speak to on a general basis looking for something where they can get better efficiency, better economics, and obviously meet sustainability targets being set in some of the markets they fly to? Or is it simply what can I get and how much, and the lowest cost that I possibly can? And where are you seeing the demand in terms of the aircraft types? Is it the smaller regional stuff or is it at the top end? Can you just enlighten us as to that?
Okay. There are 3 answers to your questions. I think the first one is that we have seen a great increase in capacity in Africa year over year between 23 and 24. There was a 6% increase year over year in capacity. And that, of course, is the result of the airlines recording about 12.5% year over year in increase in demand. So they saw 12% increase in demand. They matched it with a 6% increase in capacity. And still, there's about 2.5% gap in terms of the demand to supply. Okay. So basically, that tells me that the African market needs more aircraft. Okay. Now, let's talk about what size of aircraft. So in terms of fleet, I've seen lots of demand on the regional side, but also I've seen a lot of demand on the narrow body side. The reason why we see a lot of demand on the regional side is because there is a lot of small airlines operating in Africa. Remember, we have 54 countries, right? And every country wants its own airline. Okay. If they would get together, like a region of this area, this like west or east or south or central, then they'll need bigger aircraft with bigger capacity with a higher number of aircraft. But because they're small, that's fine. So there is demand for smaller aircraft, which is very healthy, by the way, because the smaller the aircraft, the smaller the risk. The bigger the aircraft is the bigger the risk because you have to fill those seats that are on the bigger aircraft. All right, so there is the demand for good regional aircraft, whether it's turboprops or regional jets, as well as there is demand for narrow bodies. But I would say demand for regional aircraft is healthy. Okay. Then we're talking about are they new or used? Okay. I've seen some good airlines that are going after new aircraft. Okay. But there isn't that many new aircraft available. So the problem there is that there is demand for new aircraft. Some of them, they're able to get affordable financing. Some of them are willing to pay the higher cost for non-affordable financing. But there is no inventory out there. Okay. So what they do is, of course, they fall back on the used aircraft available. So, and then there isn't that many used aircraft, especially in the narrow body market. the narrow body market is dry. In terms of sale, I cannot even count 50 aircraft worldwide that are narrow body that are available for sale on the secondary. I can't. I can tell you how many. I probably know of probably no more than 10 narrow bodies available for sale.
And
Okay.
the price
What
of
they
them
become
is going to be high, right? The price is
It
crazy
is
because the
high.
demand is there.
It is high. I totally. I just placed an offer on a 737-800, which is worth around 14 million, and I made an offer at 16.5 million. Okay, and I made that offer on behalf of customer because there is nothing else, and he wants the aircraft because the airline still has to fill its demand. It will tell you, okay, I'm willing to sustain the higher cost, but I'm going to pass on this cost to the passenger, and that explains, of course, why the fares are increasing. Okay, supply chain issues, lease costs, aircraft acquisition costs. Of course, who's going to end up paying for that? The end consumer. But because, as we said earlier on, the travel industry is at a record high, and it's doing very well, the passenger is willing to pay for it. The propensity to travel has not been as good as it's right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing you talked about the demand growth and also the supply growth, but of course the load factor is increased in Africa, but it's still below the global average by quite a long way, which would lend us to that conversation about right sizing, about using the right aircraft on the right route and making sure that's as full as possible. Like, how do you square that? Because it's going in the right direction, but it's still below the average.
Let me give you the statistic. The statistics that African airlines have seen their average load factor increased to about 72.5%. Okay, as an average. You start spinning anytime you come closer to 70. And spinning means you spill to another carrier or you spill to another mode of transportation. Okay, if you're average around that number. So there is the spinning factor, and that is that 72% is around 4% and change compared to last year. Okay. So
which is great. That's huge.
Beautiful. It's great. And 2023 was not a bad year. So it's all good news. Now, the bad news is finding the aircraft to meet the demand. It's the supply. And this is where it becomes difficult. And I need to say, and it comes out from the Dublin Airline Economics Conference, is that there are aircraft available. They're mostly in the hands of lessors. Okay, there are very few available for sale by airlines or by traders like our company, but many of them are for lease. And the new aircraft inventory that's coming most of it is controlled by lessors at this stage. And now lessors, they want to recoup their costs, of course, right? They want to recoup the higher price of the new delivered aircraft. And they want to basically recoup the cost of borrowing because they have to borrow, and they need to recoup the higher cost for equity because they get equity from financiers. They want a good return on investment, and they want to do this now because we are in the good days versus the losses that they incurred, all of them, whether it's the lender or the equity investor, or they want to recoup the losses that they did in 2020, 2021, 2022.
Yeah, we were seeing during COVID, right? There were deals where there was power by the hour, these kind of things, and very, very loose, easy leases. And obviously that those days are gone. And like you say, the powers in the lessors, that is a massively growing element of the market. I think it's over half now, right, of the aircraft operated by lessors.
Yes, it surpassed the half. Now we're getting close to, well, in terms of the capacity to supply, right now, I would say they dominate. They're like, 60 or 70% of the supply. In terms of aircraft ownership, they control now closer to 55% of the fleet.
Exactly, yeah. And the challenge there, of course, is then having a robust balance sheet. If you've got huge payments to make on, where you're paying interest, you're paying leasing charges, etc. And that is something that we're going to come to shortly. But I wanted to make one more point on the load factor side, which is, of course, outside of a couple of markets, we don't have the high density, lower cost airlines outside of a couple of markets in Africa. So a lot of the load factors in other parts of the world, they have to be higher because their business model is predicated on we need 90% plus and we make our money from ancillaries rather than we actually make it from the airfare. And Africa is not there yet, generally speaking. So
Yes.
actually it's a bit of a misleading metric, right? Like actually, like you
Yes.
said,
Yes.
74% is actually pretty good. And the
Yes.
airlines are making money on that.
Yes. Totally. Yes. Most of the airlines on the African continent are traditional airlines. They're not the low cost carriers. As you said, we can find a few in Southern Africa. We can find a few in the Northwest and a little bit in the Northeast. But predominantly, there's very few low cost airlines which operate and in the 90% load factor. And that's where they make their money, right? So basically, their modus operandi is that they have to be in the 85 plus load factors to make money. Okay. Versus traditional airline, where basically they need to be between 65 and 70 to be able to, or 65 plus to be able to make money. So it's a totally different business, actually. It's not the same. They operate the same. They both operate aircraft, but it's a totally different business. I wanna comment back on balance sheets. This is something that airlines in Africa need to understand. Going only after leasing aircraft is not a good business practice. And this is why the other airlines in the world, like even the Europeans or the major airlines, they all have a balance of owned and leased. Why? Because it helps them keep a good balance sheet. Having a good balance sheet makes it easier for you to borrow money at affordable rates. Okay. And once I was on a panel, and one of the panels was saying, no, airlines should go only for operating leases. This doesn't make sense. You need to have a proper business. You need a solid balance sheet, because a solid balance sheet gives you capabilities to buy cars with financing, to mortgage a building and get financing, to get financing from an institution to buy your next aircraft. It helps. They all want to look at your balance sheet. If not, they're going to go after your investors and they're going to say, okay, I want a personal guarantee. I want a parent guarantee and all that stuff. And then you complain about the affordability of the financing or the lease rate, blah, blah, blah. So there has to be the proper business practice is to build your balance sheet. You can manage that through having a balanced portfolio of leased versus financed or fully owned aircraft or equipment. So I just wanted to comment on that because you touched on the balance sheet point.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point because it lends me to where we're going next, which you already touched on about IATA reporting the profits. And you said globally, quite right, it's a huge market, but the profit margins even globally are pretty razor thin. In Africa, they're reporting less than $1 per passenger carried on average, and there are
Yes.
of course profitable large airlines. There are smaller airlines losing money as well. So that is an average for African airlines. And at the Aviadev conference in Windhoek last year, we did a report with Airbus, which was all about the unserved routes, the top unserved routes based on demand that exist in Africa, to and from Africa, but also within as well. And I suppose my question here is what needs to change in terms of making sure that these routes that have been identified are actually going to be served by African airlines? Because it's great to have them unserved, but a lot of the international ones are probably going to, if they get served, they'll be served by non-African airlines potentially. But how are we going to do this? How are we going to move the needle?
Okay. The better network for airlines helps economic development. So governments have a greater interest in actually developing the infrastructure to allow airlines to operate into those different regions. So this whole thing is interlinked. So yes, Airbus Consultant, they did a pretty good consulting projects for you, and they basically focused on the network development and what needs to be done and what the different contributions. So I want to talk about networks. Networks are linked to infrastructure. Infrastructure is linked to capacity requirement in terms of aircraft, and all of that is linked to a proper business plan and fleet plan. Okay. So yeah, if you do your proper studies for a business plan to develop a proper network, that should tell you, okay, here are the aircraft that you should be operating, and here are the destinations that you should be operating to maximize on your revenue. To do that, you have to have a proper infrastructure and network of airports in which you need to operate at a reasonable cost. One of the major hindrance to the profitability of these airlines in Africa is the high cost, the high navigation cost, a high terminal cost. And all these airport related costs are so high, and government related costs are so high. So one of the major challenges for the airlines in Africa is the expense of operating to the different airports in the different African region that are controlled by national governments or local governments. So those national governments or local governments, they're kind of like shooting themselves in the foot and reducing the economic development of the regions because they're charging. So they, it should start from there. They need to see how they first do proper investments in the regions for their airports. I'm talking not only infrastructure of building with airport, but also operational hours, proper lighting, proper safety setup, all of that. So they need to have proper airports to sustain a, a high usage of these airports by regional airlines or international airlines. They also need to focus on how they can reduce the cost, whether it's airport costs, terminal costs, navigation costs, fuel costs. Remember, let's not forget that fuel costs in Africa are very high, mostly because of taxation. Again, so they need to focus on the cost side. And then they're going to see more airlines coming in. And those airlines are going to bring in business people, tourists who are going to do what? They're going to spend in those regions. So, hey, it's an ecosystem. It has to start with proper governance and governments.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. It's the ecosystem, and it's very self-sustaining. But unfortunately, we do operate in silos, and it's not an African thing. It's a global thing, and trying to bring those people together and work within the bounds. Those countries and those organizations that understand this first, they're the ones that will benefit the most from the connectivity, because the airlines want to fly. They just want to mitigate the risk. They want to be supported and welcomed, not taxed and seen as, oh, brilliant, this airline's coming, we can make more money. That money will trickle through into the economy, as you say, through the spend of the tourists and the business people that arrive. So before I let you go, we've now identified what needs to be done, right, to see the growth that we need. And of course, we're expecting a doubling of the commercial fleet in Africa over the next 20 years. And that's potentially a conservative estimate. Obviously, it's driven by supply chain and availability. But, bearing in mind that those things hopefully will get sorted and the flow of aircraft will continue. I suppose the big question there is, are we ready? Are we ready to handle that in Africa? And are you excited and energized like I am about what the future holds?
The future for African aviation is super exciting. Okay. It's super exciting. We just need to keep driving that growth. The African percent of the global fleet is only around like 4%. Okay. That, considering the population of Africa, that should not be double. We should be at around like 15, 20%. We have 54 countries. It's the largest populated continent on Earth. So there is so much potential. We just need to get to it. So yes, there is a potential not to double, but also to triple. A double is very conservative, as you said. We just need to create the sustainable environment, whether it's infrastructure or financing or regulatory. We need to provide those tools to help the aviation industry in Africa. The governments have a big role to play. The communities have a big role to play. The airlines, they're doing the best they can, but they also have to do it in a proper professional, way with proper planning to be able to be successful.
Yeah, and if everybody does a little bit, right, then it makes a massive, massive impact. And it is about
Huge.
affecting and doing those baby steps, and then and understanding your role within the ecosystem. For example, you've alluded to it, and I say it all the time, which is we work very closely and support, of course, the work of IATA and AFRA and ARSA and the other associations in what they're trying to do at the top level to implement SATAM and to open the skies and to liberalize and reduce the costs for airlines. But what we're trying to do at the bottom is actually put people together to create those business opportunities in the environment that we find now. So that could be organizing a lease or a purchase. It could be a discussion between an airport and an airline that leads to a new route and starts something. So I think it's understanding that. And of course, your role as well is huge in this in terms of supporting those airlines. So, I think it's going to be really exciting the next few years. And we're super excited to have you with us in Zanzibar in June as well to
I look
meet
forward
with
to it.
all
Look
all
forward
our
to it.
airlines and airports. Yeah, it's going to be great. Yeah, we look forward to
Indeed.
having you
Yes.
then. So thank you so much for joining us, Raphael. It's great, always great to
Thank
speak
you,
to you
John.
and get a bit of an insight from inside.
Thank you. It is actually from inside. I really appreciate your time, and I want to thank you and your organization for all the effort that you are deploying for the development of aviation in Africa. And this is why the name of your organization is called Aviadev, because you want to develop aviation in Africa. Thank you very much for that. And I look forward to seeing you in Zanzibar.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Asante sana, as they say over there. But yeah, thank you so
Asante
much.
sana.
And for anybody who wants to get in touch with the team, I'll make sure I put the web address in the show notes so you can go there, go straight to the Jetcraft Commercial website. I'll also put some links in there. You connect with the team as well. As I said, they will be with us at AviaDev in June. So we look forward to seeing you all there. And we'll be back for the next episode very soon. So if you did enjoy this episode, do hit the share button, share it with somebody in your network you think would benefit from having a listen, and see you for the next episode soon. Take care. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.